there shouldn't be money somewhere that you're completely unaware of, or debt somewhere that you're just completely unaware of. It's healthy to have your own accounts and your own things that you're managing yourself, but there needs to be a way that your partner can access or knows and can follow up on it, how they can access it, and what happens if they find themselves in a situation of having to make decisions.
Welcome back to Love and Other Assets. My name is Emily and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. My husband and I decided to start Plenty when we got engaged and looked for a product to make it easier to manage our own money together, and we're shocked that we couldn't find anything. We both worked in Silicon Valley for over a decade each, primarily working in fintech, and so we set out to build something better. Today, Plenty is a wealth platform helping today's couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategy of the wealthy to the everyday households. But we also know that in Love and Money is not just about great products and tools, it's also about the conversations. So that's what we set out to do in our podcast and in our newsletter, Love and Other Assets, to help make the conversations a little bit easier for everybody here. Today's guest is Amanda Burr. She's a friend, a mom, a widow, and a new business owner. After her husband's sudden death, she has spent the last 3.5 years rebuilding the life she wants for her and her 2 kids. Amanda's journey is a testament to embracing courage and authenticity while facing her fears head on, and we're excited to share her story with you today. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on this show to share your life experiences with everyone here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So help us understand, if you think back 4 years ago, what did life look like for you?
Well, like many people, we were sort of in the middle of a lockdown and a pandemic. And thinking back on that time, it's all kind of hazy. But I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was just starting a new job. It was a bit of a pivot. And it just felt like a season of change. Yeah. And not really knowing what was going to happen for everybody.
Yeah. And as you think about, where you lived, what your partnership looked like at that time, what did that also look like?
So I was married to Carlos, my polar opposite, and he had been my best friend for 14 years, and balanced me out in all the best ways. Didn't expect actually to ever be married to him or have 2 of his kids and be in a lockdown where we spent 100% of our time together, trying to coexist between the 4 of us. Yeah, and I was in the Bay Area. I was just outside of San Francisco, so we really couldn't move around much. uh, yeah, it was a little difficult. I was just coming out of being sort of a sudden stay-at-home mom, because I had made the decision in February of 2020 to leave Stripe. And that was a big career pivot for me. And then I took some time off and bam, we went on to lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you and Carlos meet? And I also know that you mentioned that you hadn't really expected it. So what was a catalyst for your partnership and relationship starting?
Yeah. So we both worked at Apple, way back when as retail specialists. And we just formed a really fast friendship. Like I said, he was my polar opposite. So, very, analytical and logical, where I am much more emotional, lead with intuition. And so we just sort of always had a very good partnership. Together, our ideas made more sense because we filled gaps for each other and balanced each other out. Um, we were both in relationships when we met, and it just never came up as a thing until I was, single. And a lot of our close friends were like, Carlos likes you, he likes you. So at some point it boiled up to the surface. And when it came out, that was it. It was like, okay, well, yeah, there was really no dating at that point because we had known each other for so long. We just added a romantic element to it and surprised both of us. And I think several people, but it made sense.
And it sounds like you guys had this incredible partnership of yin and yang, balance each other out. When it came to managing money together, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I actually, this goes against a little bit of what I just said because I love managing finances. I love doing my own taxes. I,
I wish we could
but
bottle up that energy and pass it
I,
around a little bit more because
it's,
I definitely know.
I don't know why I love it so much. It feels a little bit like a game to me at least at that point in my life. When I was younger, it was just scary, all of it. But I think actually my career took me in a place where I learned so much about, you know, payment systems, and therefore financial systems that it became interesting to me. So I had always just managed all of our finances outright. So I was the finance person, the tax person, the decision maker, and big purchases we made together. But for the most part, he didn't really want anything to do with that. And, like he just wanted to know, like, can I buy this? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Um, and yeah, it worked out really nicely for us that it was never a point of contention or something for us to go back and forth. It worked out that we slotted into these roles really nicely.
And what did it look like then when there was a conversation and there were potentially these big purchases that were either, for the family together or for one of you individually? What did that look and feel like?
Yeah, well, I'm a planner through and through, like a type A planner. So anytime there was some big decision, I usually had it already outlined. And that would lead to a discussion between the two of us to do a pros and cons list and try to figure out how we could weigh them. We loved whiteboarding. We had whiteboards everywhere. So it would look like, a whiteboard pros and cons list and weighting the pros and cons to kind of come up with very equation based, usually with our decisions. Not always. Sometimes, he struggled a lot with making purchases that were just for fun. And so I usually have to push him, like, this is something that you'll just enjoy. Like, we can spend money on that. Um, but for the most part, we're pretty, analytical about it and
Yeah.
had real equations for how to make decisions, and a lot of conversation.
Power to the whiteboard couples for sure. When we packed up our car and our places, we also traveled with a whiteboard as we did
Yeah.
an 8-month cross country road trip. So kindred spirits.
Yeah. I don't think Carlos could have lived without a whiteboard. And we had whiteboard paint. So we were ready to like paint whole walls. It was great.
Yeah, for sure. Then, one thing I am curious about is as you kind of at the time were thinking about the future, how did you guys also navigate talking about goals that you had or what you wanted to do financially?
Yeah. So, you know, our shared goals were pretty straightforward for that time. I think for where we were as a couple, which was like buy a house. How do we get to that? And, being in the San Francisco Bay Area, that was a goal that realistically might not have ever happened, just because of how expensive real estate is. It felt so out of reach, but that was the main goal driving against. And a lot of that was, okay, if we are ever actually going to do this, if we have a chance, um, how do we break it down into smaller steps? And what do those small steps look like? And are there other goals that those small steps could lead to, that, if we have to pivot, maybe there's another goal that this is still achieving. But buying a house, saving for, setting up college savings for the kids, those are kind of the big ones. Lots of travel because we had to travel across the country to see family. But the North Star was buy a house.
Yeah. I love how also you talked about the saving and gave you actually the ability to pivot too, because what we hear from couples so oftentimes is getting started can feel hard when you're not entirely sure, what the right goal is necessarily. Like, is it actually buying the house in the Bay Area or is it actually potentially moving and moving where? And I think, even, having money set aside to buy a house in the Bay potentially actually helps you with any other goal you might be able to have together.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't have a huge savings, but when the lockdown happened, that was a big shift and a big pivot. And for the first time, the goal did change because to your point, like we started thinking, hey, if we can be remote employees and work from anywhere, is this still the right place? And if it isn't, what is the right place? And how much would we need to buy a house there? Like, does that goal become more attainable? or do we commit to where we live and shift our goal to something else? And yeah, we had made that decision actually to move back to Miami for those reasons. We're like, well, we'll just go back because we could buy a whole house like almost outright.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was
That makes
definitely
sense.
something that COVID catalyzed for everybody,
Yeah.
was opening up that possibility.
Yeah.
So you're entering COVID, you have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, you're navigating, spending all of this time together, then you had to go through what is the most unfortunate experiences that anybody can go through, and probably the most, I would say, almost like unthinkable experience. Can you tell us a little bit more of what that looked like for you at that time?
Yeah. Yeah. So I tell people that I definitely lived through my worst case scenario. And so, a little bit into the pandemic. So January of 2021, about midway through the month, Carlos was going into the garage. He worked in the garage. He had a very loud laugh, and so it was disruptive. So he made a workstation in the garage so it wouldn't disrupt the rest of the house. And he was just going down into the garage and he missed a step. There was about 5 steps going down, and tripped and fell, which I heard and checked on him. And he had hurt his leg. So we elevated it. And, at that time, January 2021 was when ICUs in the area were, at capacity. And so we did a teledoc appointment and everyone was very clear, don't go to the emergency room. Like, just don't do it because there's no room. Anyway, we sort of fast forward to the next day and his ankle is, twice the size that it should be, and he can't step on it. And I was like, I know you broke your ankle. There's no choice. You have to go to the ER. And so we went over to the ER. They took a quick look at him. Couldn't even really see him in a room. They treated him in a hallway. So it was and I couldn't be with him. He was sending me pictures of him in a hallway, just people everywhere. Which was very scary. Uh, they said, well, you need surgery. So in the process of finding surgery, for him, and, everything was delayed for a lot of reasons, and the whole medical system was really at capacity in every way possible. So nobody was really talking to him or monitoring him. But in the process of waiting for surgery, he did end up having a blood clot, and that blood clot turned into a pulmonary embolism. Um, and they just couldn't get him to the hospital fast enough when that happened at the end of the month. And so that was sort of the worst case scenario, perfect storm situation of something like this happening when the medical system was just at capacity, and strained so badly that nobody caught how at risk he was, including us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry again that you had to go through that experience too. And I think it's, at a time, especially, it's almost like the perfect storm of all these things that are supposed to be unlikely to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And so
I
what,
mean,
mhm.
it's one of those it's like a lightning strike moment, right? It just happened to hit our family. It shouldn't happen. It could have been avoided, but it's just, the perfect conditions for something terrible to happen.
If, I had been in those shoes, I think it would have been a complete blackout for the weeks and months afterwards. Do you remember what it was like for you as you were just wrapping your head around what had happened?
Um, the first year after Carlos died, is just a foggy memory at this point. The immediate moments I do remember very vividly, but everything else following that is very foggy. It's like being in a period of shock for an extended period of time. So I don't have a ton of memories. I mean, I can think back to what I was doing and like kind of piece it together, but most of it is gone. It was sort of my trauma response to block out a lot of what was
Yeah.
happening.
At the time when you were juggling, still looking after your boys, still processing for yourself, were there also any parts of like the tactics around, even just like the logistics that need to happen or the money management side of things that you were caught off guard by or surprised by?
I would say I was surprised by literally everything. Um, we sort of ironically, right before he broke his leg, we had been working with a financial advisor and they really wanted us to get life insurance. And so we had a life insurance application, and we didn't process it because he ended up breaking his leg. And we were looking for a large enough amount that we would have needed a whole medical exam and all. So we had to wait for him to heal. Um, so post all of that, that was like the first time I'd ever really thought about like, and we didn't even think about worst case scenario. We're just like, yeah, life
Yeah.
insurance makes sense. You need life insurance. And so to be in the scenario where it actually happened, it was like nothing made sense. And so everything that came up was just like, wait, what? Wait, I have to do what? Wait, what decision has to be made? Um, Nobody really has a guide for what to do next, that I was aware of at least. So everything came as a surprise. And that said, he did have life insurance through work. So, uh, and we can talk a little bit more about like how I handled that, but that was a surprise also. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew because I kind of forced him when he was doing his benefits to sign up for some things, but it was a surprise that there was anything actually.
Yeah. What was that process like when you did find out that unexpectedly there had been this benefit through work?
Yeah. So a big learning curve here because when you have life insurance, they want to pay out immediately. They want as soon as it happens, they like. I mean, immediately the next day they reached out to me and they were just like, "Hey, this is the benefit. This is what we have to pay out." And it was 1.5 times his salary, I think. Um, it might have been 2 times if I'm remembering right, but they were like, "Yeah, we have this. All we need is a death certificate." And what I learned in the process is getting a death certificate, depending on the circumstances of the death, is actually very time consuming. So from the time that Curls died to me actually getting the life insurance money was about 5 months. Um, and so something that I would very much consider now as a parent, having lived through that situation, is really thinking through not just the life insurance, but the gap. Because had he died of something that was easy to document, that wouldn't have been a thing. But he died very unexpectedly. And in fact, like through the process, the EMT, where they were treating him for anxiety, nobody flagged that this was a blood clot through the whole process. So it required a full investigation to determine the cause of death. And that takes a long time. You have, at least in California, you're required to do a toxicology report that takes 12 weeks on its own. There's an investigation about what led up to it. So I think when you think about saving for, your emergency savings, this is part of that. Like how if something like this happened and your partner who you rely on was incapacitated and you already got life insurance was there, great. But do you have the funds if there's a gap of 5 months to continue living? In
Yeah.
my
Well,
case,
and
I didn't. Like,
yeah.
uh, and thankfully, we're in a really good place with his employer just being unbelievably kind. And they sort of closed the gap for me, and paid out his salary even post death. So I got very lucky in that sense, but that's not true for really, again, this is like, that's an unheard of benefit that they decided to give me. So you can't rely on that.
Knowing what you know now, what advice do you have kind of like a number you would think of for a recommended emergency fund? Or is there a way that you think about it now that has evolved?
I think that the number that comes to mind that would make me feel the most at ease is 6 months, because most things you can kind of figure out within 6 months. But it's not unheard of for there to be that long of a gap to getting money in, in a scenario like that. So 6 months comes to mind. Um, I I personally have a very different relationship today with how I think about my finances than I did 3.5 years ago. And so at this point, I really only feel comfortable if I have like a solid year's worth of, of money sitting somewhere,
Yeah.
hopefully in an investment somewhere, but I, a year's worth of liquidity that I can pull is ideal.
Are there other ways that the way you think about money has also evolved?
Yeah. Um, yeah, a lot actually. I think to me in the moment, so I wasn't there in the hospital. Carlos left in an ambulance, and I still was under the impression that they were treating him for anxiety. And so I got a call about 30 minutes later that they had called it, and he was gone. You know, in that moment, that was an unsolvable problem. And in life, you're faced with some unsolvable problems. I think that they're rare, actually, but you're faced with unsolvable problems. Everything after that was a solvable problem, including the money. And I might not like the solve for the money, it might not be the best scenario or something I want to do, but it is solvable. Like figuring out the money aspect was solvable. And that was sort of how I kept my sanity a bit in that time frame as I'm facing an unsolvable problem. These other things are not unsolvable. They are solvable and we will solve it. Uh, yeah. And so I think it shifted the way that what power I give money, I think is a big shift for me.
Yeah. Um, as you were thinking through, that chapter too, were there any resources or support or people too that helped guide you through even just figuring out how to solve all of these unexpected things that you now needed to solve for?
Yeah. So in the wake of a significant death, especially of a spouse, um, as a spouse, you become the sole decision maker of like almost everything. And so there are just a thousand decisions that I had to make. And, we had never talked about all of these things. So I just had to like try to make the best decision I could. That said, there were a lot of decisions that I didn't have to be the decision maker. So I I relied a lot on people that I trusted. In that immediate in the wake of this happening, there were several women, most of them mothers, who just banded together to figure out what needed to be done and figure out what tasks I wasn't thinking about and who could do them and how to feed us. And I think when I look back on it, the the biggest learn that I have that I carry over into this is, build your village, even if it's not the village that like is always around you. Make sure you know your neighbors. Just know them because the people who showed up immediately for me were my neighbors in that neighborhood, because they were right there. Uh, the people who showed up for me are people who just knew me from work, from like certain outings. Like, so you never really know who is going to show up, but, build those connections because in a moment of crisis, you need people you trust. You need people who know you and are going to like step in and do some of the heavy lifting. And there was a lot of stuff they couldn't do. So I really wouldn't have been able to get through it without having that circle of trust.
Yeah. Was there any advice that you had heard from people within that circle of trust that was some of the advice that you hold on to this day?
You know, it's hard because people want to give you advice or like sentiments after you lose somebody. And the reality is, there's nothing anybody can say that's going to stick or make you feel better or not trigger you.
Yeah.
So I don't have examples of advice from that circle. I think that them just showing up and doing was the thing that was needed. But I did, quickly just look for different resources for widows, especially young widows.
Yeah.
To find people who could like help me with like, what does this even look like? Does my life end now? Like, where do I go? And I think the biggest piece of advice that I saw in blog posts and listening to um, other widows and groups was you're never going to get over it. Don't make that a goal. Um, like you're going to figure out how to live with it. It does get better, but you're never going to get over it. It's the analogy that I like is that, if you imagine a box and there's a ball in the box and the ball takes up the whole box inside, it fits perfectly. That's what grief is like immediately. It fills up your whole space, your whole box, your universe. But eventually your box gets bigger. The ball stays the same, but the box starts getting bigger. And so there becomes space around it. And so it never goes away. And I think I'm a problem solver. So it's easy for me to fall in the trap of like, oh, here's a problem. It's grief and I'm going to solve it. And that's
Yeah.
not healthy or, or realistic.
Yeah. And it sounds like it also came at a time when not only would it have been almost impossibly difficult just to process that on your own, you're also trying to show up as a mother of two. And then there are all of the decisions that you are left with. As you think about some of the decisions that you're left with, I think you were the one who was so used to managing money for the two of you. Were there parts of that process still, even though you had already known where everything is, known what the process for managing, that was unexpectedly confusing or difficult?
Yeah. I mean, I will say first, I was incredibly lucky that I was the person who managed our finances because we didn't have a single account that I didn't have access to, or wasn't the beneficiary on or had control of. So that made things very easy for me. And I don't think that's the norm. I think usually there's some shared or there's some accounts. And so I didn't run into that issue. Um, but I did run into the complexities of getting a very large check. Um, when the life insurance did pay out and it doubled because his death was ruled an accident. So we got the accidental death and dismemberment. That was another surprise. I did not know that that doubled the life insurance benefit. So a good surprise, but still a surprise. I, was receiving the largest check I'd ever seen. Right, the most amount of money in front of me on a check, um, which was very surreal. And I was very surprised in like the feelings I had about that, both because like, this is money for my husband's life, which already unpacks a lot of emotion, but also I didn't come from money. And so I've never seen, I just, I was not prepared for what to do in a scenario where you just kind of get a windfall. And and a little surprising thing that happened to me was I
Mhm.
went to the bank and I banked with a large banker, and I deposited it, and almost immediately that afternoon got a call from them. They're like, "We're going to make you a private client. We're going to make you this," and I didn't know that there were like going to be these additional benefits to having a
Yeah.
large chunk of money in a bank account.
Mhm.
um, so that caught me off guard. And that was sort of the impetus for immediately going and finding a financial advisor that could meet my new life goals, and
Mhm.
help me figure out, how do I do this in a way that I don't just lose all this money because I start spending it on things, because
Yeah.
that's what you end up doing.
Yeah.
Or where do I put money to make the most sense for the family?
Mhm. It makes a lot of sense. And I am curious, given that you had spent time looking into resources for other widows, or given, how well you had known Carlos, if the situations had been reversed and Carlos was left to try to navigate, what do you think would have happened?
I really don't know. I I don't think he would have approached it the same way as me at all. He likely would have just let other people handle all of it. I can't give away that much control of a situation. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know, actually. I think he would have really struggled. I think he was not prepared for something like that for sure. Where I was set up, I was in the best position I could have been in realistically for this horrible scenario, but I really was in control of everything. Um, where he just wouldn't, I don't think he even knew the logins for a lot of our accounts. So he would have been on a much longer journey than I was.
Given what you have had to live through, would you have, if you had had the chance to go back in time and think about a different way of managing money, would you have done anything differently? Or is there any advice that you would have for couples who are managing money together now?
Yeah, I think, you know, don't give money more power than it deserves. It's really easy to do it, right? Because it feels like everything we're doing is just to get to the next level, the next level, the next level, or the next, salary bracket, the next tax bracket. But money, money shouldn't have that much power over our lives. Um, and I think my shift from sort of being in the rat race to like business owner, like owning and building a new foundation for my family is a real shift mentally on how I think about money and how I think about it in a relationship and for a family. Like it used to be, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. And now it's kind of like, yeah, money is important. And I'm going to stress about it. I do. I stress about money all the time. But it's not the thing. Like, what are we doing that is meaningful or is an experience or whatever, like whatever's important to you? And then how does money flow into that
Mhm.
instead of leading with money?
Mhm. And is there a level of involvement too that you think now is just an important foundation for couples to have?
Yeah, I think there really there shouldn't be money somewhere that you're completely unaware of, or debt somewhere that you're just completely unaware of. I think it's healthy to have your own accounts and your own things that you're managing yourself, but there needs to be a way that your partner can access or knows and can follow up on it. Because in the event of something happening, it doesn't even have to be, something as extreme as death. It could just be an injury. You just need to be able to step in and be able to control the money, the assets, if needed. So I I feel very strongly that there should not never be any surprises when it comes to finances, as in a relationship and for a family, right? Like I'm building this for me and the whole family, right? It's not just about the spouse, it's about the kids, if you're going to have kids, and they have a piece of this pie too. And at some point, I have to let them in on what it is and how they can access it and what happens if they find themselves in a situation of having to make decisions.
Mhm. I know I've been so grateful for the story that you have shared too, and just being able to learn from your experience, because it actually has prompted us actually internally to start having conversations about what it would look like to have something where we actually do provide a list of accounts were anything to happen, because at least it gives a starting point for that, especially if you're
Yeah.
not used to or not familiar with where things are.
Yeah, I love that because I do think like I mentioned I was in this fog. It was like
Mhm.
I didn't have the capacity to figure some of this stuff out. So anything that can make things easier for somebody who does end up in this sort of worst case scenario is going to be incredibly helpful for the long term.
Mhm. And, as you think about for people listening who are parents, do you have any advice that is specific for people who are parents, that after having experienced everything, you either wish you had known earlier or would pass on to them?
Yeah, I the importance of life insurance. I think as soon as you have a child, you should have life insurance. Probably even before, if you're thinking about having kids, you should get life insurance. I think I would not have been able to rebuild my life without that. Realistically, I don't know where I would be. So I'd say it's incredibly important and it should not be skimmed over or not thought about. And then the other is, teach your kids finance. Don't forget, and even starting young, like have them, be a part of the process in whatever way makes sense for them, age appropriately, but like include them in, your estate planning, obviously, because they're going to be beneficiaries, but let them know what that looks like for them so that they aren't surprised too, um, or they don't make, bad decisions in the event that they get control of an account or get a windfall themselves.
How have you woven that into thinking about how you are now raising your boys?
They have a very funny concept of money. They yesterday one of them asked me, so they're 7 and 5 right now, so they're like prime age to like really figure this out. One of them asked me the other day if we were rich, which I just thought was such an interesting question. And I didn't have a good answer. I was like, I guess by some standards, like we are, and it depends on how you define it. And let's talk a little bit more about what it means and what you think it means. So a lot of it is just making sure that when we're talking about money in the house, they're included. I don't like hiding stuff. And of course, they don't need to know about what's stressing us out. That's not a concern that they should have. But when we're making decisions for them, like birthday party, I had my oldest son, Miles. I told him for his birthday party that he could pick out the bouncy house, which meant that we were looking online at what bouncy houses we could do, and he could see the prices. And he's a math whiz kid. So he understands the concept of this pretty well. And he's like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, so much money. And I was like, yeah, it is a lot of money. So it's like a special thing that I'm willing to invest in this experience, but like, let's give some parameters and let's try to make some
Yeah.
good decisions into what goes
Mhm.
into your birthday party. Uh,
Mm.
and I think it helped him make a better decision. We still ended up with an outrageous bouncy house, but like, it, I think when he starts understanding how much money,
Mhm.
how much resource goes into this type of experience,
Mhm.
he starts conceptualizing a little bit better and understanding like why it's special,
Mhm.
or why maybe some other people don't have that, or some other people have a different thing. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's incredible. I really love that story. I feel like it's so incredible that you've already brought him in at such a young age to also think about value. It's like what is worth it, what is not. There are experiences that are worth it, but it's not free. It took work for mom to get there to make that possible. So I love all of the parts of that. Mm. And, as you have had to navigate now managing money, given that you have been the person who was used to managing money before, would you have any advice for other people who are in a position where they are unexpectedly faced with managing money on their own or just managing a windfall?
yeah, get a trusted advisor.
Mm.
It's I think it's unreasonable to think that you should be able to come up with all of these decisions or goals or figure out a game plan on your own. It's just
Mhm.
unreasonable. And so for me, that was a financial advisor. I really wanted somebody who was a third party uh, outside of my life to help me make some of these decisions. There were other people involved that I trusted like close friends and some family to help me, but definitely trusted advisor. Don't feel like you have to go at it alone because you really shouldn't. It's not a reasonable expectation.
Yeah. Uh, I think that also resonates so much with the village that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier too. And as you look ahead, what are some of the things you are most excited for?
Well, we have new love in our life, so I just recently got engaged, which is very exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hmm.
So my fiance is Dave, and so we are now planning a wedding, which is, I mean, it's one of those things like you just life is just not going to my plan at all, but it is still like it's magical. Like these things
Mhm.
just kind of happen if you kind of keep going.
Mhm.
So we're looking forward to that, and that's going really great. Kids love him.
Mm.
Yeah, and we're on a whole new adventure.
Yeah, and have you and Dave also talked about how you're thinking about managing money together?
Yes. So very similar to how me and Carlos approached it. He's very happy to take a back seat, but we do have all of the conversations we need to have together about how we budget, what our goals are, where money is sitting, making sure that we all are on accounts that we need to be on. We've been doing that work over this last years, making sure that we're actually on shared accounts where we should be. And yeah, and a lot of that conversation, a little bit different, right? He's coming into a situation where he's going to be a father figure for these two kids. And so there's also a lot of conversation around, well, I used life insurance to buy this house, and a portion of that has to go just to the kids. And so talking about breakdowns and like this is three families, right? Didn't I didn't leave Carlos. It's still an active relationship in my life. It's still an active relationship in the boy's life. And so we're merging sort of three families into to one, which takes a little bit of a different lens when you talk about finance and going into the next step. And even things like, guardianship and, potentially adopting the kids and how that shifts our financial goals a bit too.
hmm And as you think about the financial goals that you are saving up for now, what is one that you're most excited about?
Well, I think it might be obvious. We have a wedding coming up. We're going to get married in New Orleans. And I'm
Mm,
very excited to have like the New Orleans wedding. I want good food and good drinks and lots of good music. So that's really exciting. And having, I mentioned we're having three families come together, and that's true for the wedding. So it'll be great to have all three sides mix and blend. Yeah, it'll be a good time.
And it sounds like not just in love and new rebirth, you've also started a company too. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, I have a problem where I don't know how to, I don't know, not do things or take a break. So I've actually started two businesses this year. The one I'm most focused on is a kitchen and bath remodeling business that me and Dave are doing together. So it's
Love that.
exciting. I'm just designing kitchens and getting all set up. We're going to have a physical location for a showroom. So we're doing everything it takes to do that, which is a big learning curve for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never really set up a brick and mortar space. And then I also, left my corporate job earlier this year and I set up a consulting business to continue to help tech companies with their learning and development needs and scaling them. So it's been a really exciting year, not one that I could predict by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, planning weddings, building businesses, doing it all.
Love it. And building it as a husband and wife team.
Yeah.
For people who are listening along, if they want to learn a little bit more about either your kitchen and bath remodeling business or your L&D consultancy, where can they find you?
Well, right now you can find me on LinkedIn. We don't have a web presence yet because we're that fresh, but you can find me on LinkedIn. And my consulting stuff is on there. So reach out via.
And I will happily put in a plug. Amanda led the onboarding training for me when I was at Stripe. Absolutely made that felt an integral part of the whole cultural introduction to Stripe. So couldn't recommend her more for that as well.
Thank you.
To wrap up, I have a few lightning round questions if that sounds
Yeah.
good to you.
Yeah. Sounds great.
What's a trip you're excited to take just you and Dave alone?
Well, Dave's never been to California, so I am really excited to take him out to San Francisco sometime and Yosemite. Hoping maybe next year we can plan that.
Mm-hmm. And what is a trip that you're really excited to take with Dave and the boys?
Well, we go to New Orleans a lot, and that's been like a staple. We do enjoy going to New Orleans, all of us. But I don't have anything planned. That said, we did just do this really great kayaking trip in the Springs in Florida, and I would love to do that again. So we'll probably plan something like that.
Awesome. Final question here. What is a recent purchase under $100 that has unexpectedly improved your life?
Any of my Lego kits. Constantly, but like it's like therapy for me to sit down and build something. And then I have them all like I've got bouquets and I've got little insect collections. We have a whole Lego wall that Dave built. So sometimes I write little messages on it. But yeah, Legos is my go-to $100 or less purchase. Brings me joy.
I will at some point have you and Channing talk all things Lego because I'm currently sitting in a room where we have multiple boxes of Star Wars Lego.
Oh my goodness. I have this like idea to do a Lego guest book for the wedding where people have to make their own Lego minifig.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I love that. Maybe someone from Lego is listening and they can sponsor that.
Yes, I will take sponsorship.
Perfect. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for bringing your vulnerability and experience to our show and for sharing the advice that hopefully will also be able to be passed forward to other people and live on through them. Thank you
Thank
again.
you, Emily. It was a pleasure.